All right, man. So we got some huge campaign news coming out of the Kamala Harris campaign. Some plans have broken. So it says news: VP Harris and Governor Walz will launch a campaign bus tour through South Georgia next week. In 2022, I reported on how outreach to rural black voters outside Metro Atlanta has been key to Democrats' advances in Georgia. So as you guys know, Georgia was a surprise change last election cycle. It was absolutely huge, and hopefully it'll be able to be flipped again, but it's a really, really close state. So this article says Harris Walz planned bus tour across South Georgia. So this represents an actual interesting shift in strategy here, because the strategy typically you would think for Georgia is to go to Atlanta, DeKalb County, Gwinnett, like those big ass counties with a bunch of blues in them. You go to all the blues areas and just stem the fudge out of that, because that's where most people are, and you can kind of win off that. But their strategy is interesting here. So check this out. So it says Vice President Kamala Harris and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz will launch a bus tour next week across South Georgia, concluding with the Thursday night Harris rally around Savannah. The campaign swing comes days after Harris formally accepted her nomination. And so what we can see here is it says, while Democratic candidates typically focus energy and resources around Metro Atlanta, home to the bulk of the state's Democratic electorate, strategists and organizers say outreach outside of populous Fulton, DeKalb, Cobb, and Gwinnett counties has played a key role in recent wins. The state has significant populations of black voters in smaller metro areas like Savannah, Columbus. I don't even know how to pronounce this. Macon? It's like bacon, but with an M. Macon? Oh man, English is stupid, dude. I don't know if it's like a French loan word or if it's just a stupid word. Macon, Macon. Oh wow. And Albany. Quentin Fulks, the Harris deputy campaign manager who ran U.S. Senator Raphael Warnock's successful 2022 campaign, told Wabe last night that reaching more corners of the state is a top lesson he is applying to this national campaign in 2024. So they have the guy who helped Raphael Warnock win his race in 2022. Quote, I think Democrats have to go places where they don't normally go, Fulks says. I'm not saying we're going to turn counties we're losing 90-10 to places we are somehow now winning, but we have to cut down on those margins. Obviously, you don't have to win, right? If you can just shift the margin. Same thing with, when I'll say like, oh, can Kamala do something for male voters? They'll think like, oh, well, no, she's never going to win it over. Doofus, you don't need to win shit. You just need to make gains in that area. Like even Bernie Sanders in 2020, he doesn't have to win the black vote. He just has to get enough of the black vote. Maybe get like 40%, 35%. You don't need to win any specific category. Well, other ones that you're already winning or need to win. In other categories you're losing, you don't have to do things to win the category. You just need to make gains inside of that category. Goobers. It talks about how super important is won by less than 12,000. And then talks about JD Vance. I know you guys seen those cringe ass JD Vance videos in the donut shop. I think in the donut shop video, or I don't know if it was a sandwich one, but he's like, oh no, I think it's a donut one. He's like, I guess she didn't want to be filmed, so it wasn't planned. So she's like, I don't want to be on camera and all this stuff. It also talks about Walz. So it says Democrats also hope Walz, a former high school football coach raised in a small town, will resonate especially in the smaller towns and rural counties that characterize much of South Georgia, places that have traditionally been Republican strongholds. During a bus tour before the DNC across western Pennsylvania, among other stops, Harris and Walz visited a high school football practice. So hopefully that kind of football coach energy can kind of resonate as well. It's part of American culture. I remember I saw the stream where the coverage stream of DNC where, Lance and David were like, what is going on with all these, football references? It's part of the culture, man. That's the problem with having the Canadian invasion on American political analysis. But yeah, it's part of that. So I know everybody looks at Atlanta as the African-American Mecca, Albany Commissioner Demetrius Young told Wabe in 2022. But if you follow this blue wave in Georgia, it came right through Albany down in southwest Georgia. We need to hold the ground that we've gained. Here's something really fascinating too, so I didn't know this. It says, nearly a quarter of rural Americans were people of color in 2020, according to analysis by the Brookings Institution. While the country's rural population is shrinking overall, its diversity is growing. So it gives you kind of an opportunity to be able to go into those areas. I'm personally really big on the Sun Belt. I'm bigger on the Sun Belt than I am the Rust Belt, because the Sun Belt is much more diverse, and there's something else that we'll get into in a second, so make sure to stick for that. When people think of rural voters, they think of farmers, white people. Albany State University alum Maggie Bell told Wabe in 2022. But really, there are black people down here. Black people who want to be part of the election process, but they don't get a knock at their door. And what we can see here is this title says, Georgia's rural black voters helped propel Democrats before. Will they do it again? It says, Johnny Armstrong says he voted in Albany since 1955, so he remembers an era where local officials tried to keep black voters like him from the ballot box. They'd give you a bottle, a big thing with a lot of marbles in it. You guess how many marbles, then you can vote. And so he's really excited about being able to have voted for, Georgia's first black senator. And he basically talks about how there wasn't really much of anything going on. And so Stacey Abrams said, Atlanta cannot live without Albany, and Albany cannot live without the investments that come from Atlanta. We need to talk to those forgotten voters, the ones who are rarely talked about. I'm running for governor because we need a governor who comes from a town like Albany, where begin does not dictate what we become. So Stacey Abrams, largely credited, rightfully so, for a lot of what happened in Georgia. She led like these massive voter drives and just kind of the movement altogether. So just absolutely, absolutely massive. And so, talks about how, he was somebody who never was kind of knocked down doors for or anything like that. And then finally, they're able to get to him. So what we can see generally in terms of our analysis of what they're doing is, first off, the Kamala Harris campaign is pretty much the opposite of the Hillary campaigns, like the anti-Hillary campaign. I was even reading some stuff on Twitter. People had posted from like a New York Times article where in the Rust Belt states, people would go to the campaign headquarters and ask for signs and those kinds of stuff. And they'd just be like, it's not really a well-known strategy for winning, so we're actually not going to give you anything, and they just went away. So, it's basically the opposite. She actually never stepped foot in Wisconsin. They're driving a fudging bus, not through Metro Atlanta. They're going through South Georgia to go through the rural areas. And this kind of effort, I think, is going to land really well with people. And I think it's really going to help her get these drives out. And this is, again, the big difference between her and Hillary. She said she's the underdog. She never talks about herself being a woman and making that like a big pull for her, getting the votes. So it's just a completely different strategy that's way more on the ground, involved, etc., and kind of more outside of the box for a presidential candidate. And another thing that's really huge for Georgia, and this is another reason why I'm really big on the Sun Belt in general, we can see here in Georgia two major things happen in 2020. First off, Joe Biden is ahead by 1.2 in the aggregate polling data on election day. And what ends up happening is he actually ends up winning by 0.2 points. So the poll was wrong by 1 percentage point, which is actually really, really, really good. The other polling errors were absolutely awful. Arizona actually wasn't too bad. It was about 2.2 or 2.3 points off. Michigan was, I think, about 5.5 points off. Wisconsin, the most criminal, seven some change off. Over 7 points off in the aggregate. You can see, these numbers here. Wisconsin, Biden is up 8.4. He wins by 0.7. It's the lowest one in the entire Rust Belt. In Michigan, you can see these numbers here. In Michigan, he's up 7.9. He wins by slightly less than 3. It's like 2.8, I believe. So it's off by about 5 points, a little bit above 5 points. And then Pennsylvania is the least worst. So it's 4.7 is the lead that it's in. And then he ends up winning by 1.2. So about 3.5 points off. That's the best number to be off in the Rust Belt. That's why I'm bigger on Pennsylvania than the other states. Michigan, actually, I'm the most, but then Pennsylvania, then Wisconsin. But the beauty of the Sun Belt, another reason why I'm so big on them, is, again, Arizona, right? 2.6. He wins by, I think, 0.3. So the margin off was 2.3, which is far better than anything in the Rust Belt, right? There's a second thing, too, though, about why I'm so big on the Sun Belt. So you can see here, if plus 1.2, so that means Biden was at 48.6 percentage points. And then what we can see is he ends up getting 49.5. So what happened was he actually overperformed his numbers very significantly, a full percentage point. And that's the only reason why he was able to survive, because Trump underestimated by 2 points again. And Biden still wins Georgia because of his overperformance. And this is likely because Georgia and the Sun Belt has a lot of these young voters, diverse voters, these kinds of different races, black people, Hispanics, women, etc. And they're being missed by the polls and underestimated. And I think Kamala's going to push that amount even more to like '08 Obama numbers, where there's going to be a lot of overestimation. There's no evidence of underestimation for Democrats in the Rust Belt. It's only overestimation, and then massive underestimation for Trump. Same thing with Arizona. In Arizona, I think he got 49.4 in that state. And so he ended up, I think, overperforming by about 0.7 points in Arizona. So I'm personally bigger on the Sun Belt. So she's down right now, for example, just for reference. In the state, Arizona, she's up 1.4, which is huge. But in Georgia, she's actually down 0.5. But this 0.5 has a better chance of actually going blue for Harris than the Wisconsin number does. Because Wisconsin, she's up 3.8, but the polling error was 7.7. So it's actually much, much closer for Georgia to go blue because the polling error was just 1 point. So we should look at a +5 better than a +3.8 in Wisconsin for reference. So Kamala, good situation in Georgia, a really interesting strategy. She's kind of going through the hard work of like campaigning and all this stuff. So Georgia's absolutely massive, obviously. And if you win it, it's pretty hard to lose the election. So really wanted to update you guys on what the Kamala Harris campaign is doing and what's going on in Georgia.